On October 20th, 1967, me and Roger were riding up the creek in Bluff Creek, and we looked to past the root ball to our left, and up stood this creature. Now, you all know the story from here, but this is the confession. So, when I chased this creature up the bowling alley just after the sandbar there, she kind of put her two hands on this log and started to bend over and shake her rear end there profusely, and I saw those Bigfoot cheeks clap. And I looked back, and Roger, he was doing some relaxed dance, and he said, "Now everybody in the club getting tipsy." I'm not sure what that meant. And, well, all I thought was, they really are real. They really do exist. So that's the confession, and Russell Accord can suck my...
Welcome, everybody, to the Squatchers Lounge podcast. As promised, this week, we do have a guest in-house with us tonight, and his name is Mr. Randy Harrington. How you doing there, Mr. Randy?
I'm good, Jeff. It's good to be here, buddy.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to be talking tonight about some of the things and into the 400. Four fellas go in to look for the Ozark Mountains Sasquatch. I think that's a hell of an idea there myself. If you can narrow it down to 400 acres, God bless you, my friend. We were talking all last week while we were in the chat last week. Randy was sending me some stuff over Facebook, and I was just like, well, you know what, dadgummit, let's get into it and talk about it. So Randy, how did the idea of Into the 400 come out?
Well, first, to backtrack just a second, I actually your YouTube show came on to my one of my suggestions, and so when it said you were talking about families of Bigfoot, of course it was interesting to me because we're dealing with a family on this 400 acres, and I actually got invited to the 400 acres by a gentleman named Shane Carpenter, and he has a YouTube channel called Ozark Mountain Sasquatch. So if you want to acquaint yourself to what's going on at the 400, just go to his channel, and there's all kinds of videos that you can check out there. But I was invited by him to go there, and it's been almost 4 years now, maybe even 4 years, and it has been a wild ride.
Now, what part of the country are you stationed in, Randy?
I live just outside of Kansas City, but the property is in southern Missouri.
In southern Missouri. So we're talking about ancient, those would be Aztecs. The Aztec nation ran all the way over to eastern Mississippi. So it would definitely come up through that area as well. Because the reason I bring that up is because the southern Aztecs, well, I guess those would be northern Aztecs, I had stories of wild men and creatures that ran all through the north of the desert, the north of the desert, in the Greenlands of the north of the desert, which would, definitely be all of that area up through Texas. The Apache called them, what did the Apache call them? Now, slipping the tongue. It's slipping my mind what the Apache called them, but they all kind of had a name for a wild man that ran all through that area that was there.
Yeah, and they are still running there, and now it's the Ozarks, but yeah, I mean pre Ozarks, I'm sure the Native Americans know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, that becomes the big thing. It is Indigenous Americans month, and I do take to be part heathen. I appreciate that, savage, whatever you want to call us. It's okay. We're used to it by now. But the Ozark, there was also the Ozark monster I'm going to say it was a cat-like creature that's reported in there as well. I've got a file on my channel here somewhere about it. The Ozark Mountains themselves are just they're full of mysterious cryptid type creatures. That go from anywhere from the old pioneers. You can't call them pilgrims at that point. I guess they would be pioneers going through Oklahoma. But the family structure, that was one of the things that I had brought up last week, because there isn't a whole lot of research, investigation. Right. There isn't a whole lot of facts with people that have seen multiples on a regular basis. We get juvenile tracks and adult tracks. If we assume that, for all we know, they could be dwarf Sasquatch. You do realize that could be a thing. They're definitely
sure. There's got to
little
be some
little people, right? Genetic, right? The genetic spectrum. If they're a genetic creature, then the genetic spectrum has to work. And there would be mentally ill Sasquatch. There would be sexually assaulting Sasquatch. There would be murdering Sasquatch. There would be stupid Sasquatch. The whole gambit would have to run, would it not?
Well, and there seems to be plenty of Bigfoot stories out there that back that up.
I would, because exactly, it's never always just like, look, when somebody tells you a deer story, well, there I was, we were walking down the trail, and we came out to this meadow, and a deer stopped and stared at us, licked his lips, ate a little bit of grass, and then ran off, because that's what deer do. But almost every single Bigfoot story you hear has like some little niche to it that's not the same as every other one you've ever heard, which makes it a little, makes it difficult in believability on one side, but yet on the other side, when it comes to the real spectrum of biology, makes total sense.
Well, I mentioned to you when we were commenting back and forth to each other in text messages that we had a biologist come out with us at the 400, and his name is Dan Nedrolo, and I encouraged you to reach out to him because you said you knew him. And when I spoke to Dan earlier today, he indeed said that he knows you very well.
Yes.
And so I was only encouraging you to reach out to him just for in your own mind, to verify that when I'm talking about the 400, it's a legit place, and Dan has his own experiences out there, and he actually saw a juvenile. We watched it on thermal and was able to get within 8 foot of it. So he's got some very good stuff that he's witnessed to out there. And I wanted to make sure that you, before I go into any stories and things about the 400, I wanted you to be secure in knowing that I'm not making stuff up.
Well, that's and I appreciate that. I do. And I know Dan very well. We've been Facebook friends and in contact for a lot of years. And when you dropped his name and said that I could contact him to verify that situation, I knew I could, and I knew I didn't need to at that point, because Dan's a very upstanding fellow. He has absolutely no reason. And if he'll stand behind what's going on, that's fine. But I want to take an opportunity to get Dan on the show, which I've been meaning to do for years, but our paths never seem to really line up. The stars never really seem to line up to get him on the show. But I definitely, after this, I'm going to reach out to Shane as well and see if we can't have Shane on the show.
Yeah, I mean, I can't thank Shane enough, and you definitely need his perspective and his take on everything that's going out there. Mine is just a snippet of what's going on out there,
right?
Because again, he invited me.
Something like this eventually has to happen to somebody who's not a Sasquatch Ontario, having marbles appearing in the middle of the night, in the middle of the room, and having discussions with Nefertiti and the Nephilim. I mean, at some point, my family farm had visitors twice a year. We had visitors that would come through there in the springtime, and then we had visitors that would come back through there in the fall time, because that's when the food sources were available along the creek that ran along our farm. We didn't mess with them. My great uncle knew they were there, knew about the times that they would be there. He'd actually pull his cattle, and he would pull his horses, and he would pull all the livestock out of that area to let those animals do what they're going to do, those couple of times a year for 3 or 4 weeks. Eventually, somebody had to identify something like that to be able to do a research type of situation. Everybody wants to call themselves a Bigfoot researcher, but most of us go out in the field for a week, maybe 10 days, and then we go to hell home. That's not a researcher. A researcher is out there, 4, 5, 6 months living in it, or live directly into it, and they're dealing with it daily. An investigator goes out and investigates. I mean, that's what we do. But a real research project with something that is feasible. 400 acres, that's a lot of space.
Well, and this is just the land that we have access to. It borders other lands. And when I first came into this project, Shane was telling us that there seems to be about a 3-week pattern where for 2 weeks they're on this property and a week they're somewhere else. So they seem to be on some type of rotational circuit that they travel around. And
well, it would have to be food.
Right, and retreat back to this 400 acres because it's the 400 acres that nobody lives on, and it's gated. So,
well, like a bear, people. I liken a Sasquatch feeding to a bear only because of the sheer amount of calories that it would have to actually consume, and if it's in a family unit like that, you're going to be consuming like a ton of calories between them all. A bear, an average California black bear, will eat 10,000 calories in a day, but he doesn't eat every day. So he may only eat every third day, but when he does eat, he's consuming 10,000 calories. So
right, we have a very limited knowledge of what they're consuming, but we do have some knowledge of what they're consuming, and some of what they're consuming is these freshwater clams. We're finding where they're digging them up. By where their footprints are found, and we're finding sticks and shells where they're digging up the clams as the water retreats in this lake area. We also find a lot of Shane finds a lot of pawpaw seeds in their scat. So there's some pawpaw trees on this property where they're eating up this pawpaw fruit, or you could call it fruit. But the seeds are found in their scat late December. And that's like 2 months after it is completely off the trees and completely off the grounds. So we're having a little bit of trouble trying to figure out where they're getting the pawpaws.
Yeah, they'd have to be storing it somewhere.
Right. That's what we're thinking. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense.
You could bury it. A lot of animals do bury food. Cats will bury a lot of food and go back to it.
Squirrels bury.
Right.
So.
I mean, it's not a far stretch to think that an upper primate would understand how to dig a hole and stick some fruit in it for later in the year. Because they're not going to hibernate. I mean, if they're any kind of an ape, they're not going to hibernate. We don't have any hibernating apes on the planet. It wouldn't make any sense for this one be the special super duper only. That's the thing about biology and how it works. But the world and everything works on generalities. It's just the way everything. Yes. Are there exclusions or examples of other than normal? Sure. That's what we call deviant. But
yeah.
That's the question.
When I had my first major encounter back in 2006, it was a very close-up encounter where I watched two walk into my campsite and around my truck from within my truck. So they got as close as 10 foot from me. And that was, I've told that story so many times, but that was the initial beginning of my obsession. And I took in a lot of details from that sighting, and I've got to tell you, I've gone from thinking that they are a brutish ape looking thing that we need to be afraid of. And all of this time, I've had so many things happen. And now at the 400, we're dealing with a family unit. I'm telling you, what we've caught on thermal video multiple times is showing me a behavior that I now believe these things are a thinking hominid, to the point where I have to think of them not as an animal. Just because they look like an animal, their thought processes make me think that they are almost like a wild people, which is very tough. It's been tough for me to get on board that ship.
Well, see, that's I don't have a problem with I mean, the word people. I don't have a problem calling them a people as long as you're going to call a chimpanzee troop people.
Right.
and gorillas, a gorilla troop people, and orangutan troop people, because they are. Their thought they're so sad to see them in a zoo. When I was a kid, I loved it.
Sure.
It was a huge thing to see monkeys in the zoo. When I was a kid, we lived, near DC. We went to the National Zoo. We saw the orangutans and I mean, it was amazing. Now in today's day and age, it is so sad, especially to see them same gorillas that have been in there 30, 40 years.
Right.
To know that
Pitiful.
they're in these little friggin' tiny enclosures when they used to roam a
Concrete
mountainside.
walls.
Right. We don't know how to take care of those beings. Those aren't animals. The upper apes, even as far down as some of the, like the Siamang. My wife worked in the Oakland Zoo as a volunteer there in their animal house, and she got to work with the Siamangs. And those things, you can see in their face that they think, they know, they feel, they understand. They get routine, they have a core. They were brothers, and you could tell that they loved each other. I mean, so, I don't have a problem with the Sasquatch tribe, a Sasquatch troop, a Sasquatch family. Those things I don't have an issue with, because they are upper, not just upper primates, but upper apes.
I mean, certainly I don't know. I'm just saying that over time, I've kind of done a flip flop on.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. I just thought they were just dumb old friggin' monkey things that used to walk through the forest. No, these things have a purpose. And
right. Well, I did send you one audio of something rooting around in our campsite, making noises like it's breaking branches and popping things, and then at the very end there's a loud crack.
Sticks breaking after a sniff.
Yeah. Now the reason that Shane and I think that is probably the male that we've never seen. We have not seen the male. We've only seen his tracks, and they are about 16 inches. So I don't really want to see the male, and I would like him to just keep his distance. His tracks are always found on the border of this property, almost like he patrols the border and lets the two juveniles and the female come down into the low areas, and they're the ones that we find are digging up the clams and things like that. So when we heard that noise of the loud crack, we were thinking that we haven't had any of that type of activity with the young ones. All we get out of them is just curious behavior. This one seemed more deliberate, and maybe he was being watched by the young ones while he was rooting around through and he made that loud crack to show them, hey,
get the hell out.
to let them know that he's the one in charge, because right. I think it took him a while to figure out that the campsite was empty. I think he was rooting around and looking around, and I think he was nervous because I remember seeing the two at my campsite at the Chickasaw Park, and the big one, even though he was about 8.5 foot tall, seemed very nervous and positioned himself behind the truck in a way that put the truck between him and the tent. And he kept looking towards the tent. Even though there was a table full of food, they never stepped out from behind that truck. They didn't know I was in the truck, and I could see his full body standing there, but he was nervous about the tent. So I took that same behavior from when I listened to that audio, that I think if that was their demeanor, to be very nervous, I think it took him a while to figure out that the campsite was empty. And when he decided it was empty, he felt comfortable enough to break this huge branch for the kids because they were watching. He wanted to let them know that he's the one in charge.
Right, not that stupid campsite. Don't you worry about that. I'm the man. Right. Well, let's go ahead and give that one a play here real quick, and we'll let everybody experience that one. That was the what was it? The sticks breaking after a sniff. Okay, I'm coming out of the tent with my pistol. I want to know what the hell that was. You know, yeah, no, thank you. When I used to investigate in Florida, I used to set up a decoy camp, and then I would cowboy up a little ways away from it and sit there and watch the decoy camp. So I'd go in there and I'd set up a tent, a chair, and a fire ring, and I'd go over there and I'd stoke the fire every couple of hours and let it kick up, and then I'd walk away from it, and then I'd just go post up underneath a palm tree or behind a palm frond, and I'd just sit there and watch that camp and see what happened throughout the night. And several occasions, a dark shadow that, of course, in that time we didn't have thermal or any really good video, night vision stuff that you could get anything, but big ass dark shadows go stomping through that camp, pushing stuff over, and then just traipse off in through the bush and disappear. And I do mean disappear, because you can't follow anything in Florida. When you get into the Ocala National Forest, it's basically all sugar sand and pine needles. So it doesn't ever leave a good enough impression for you to really even cast. There's depressions in the sand that you might be able to guess which way they went. And then as soon as you follow 2 or 3 of them, they're gone. So I could imagine here that that wouldn't be the case, that they're actually leaving some serious tracks behind.
Well, the ground is quite rocky. It's a lot of rock and very tough to find impressions. The only time we can find the good clear tracks is when the water in the lake starts to recede and they come down this creek and they go out there and they start digging up clams, and that's where we're finding all their footprints. And it's the 2 juveniles and the adult female.
That was one of the things about the Elway trackway, the London trackway that they had found. It was the same kind of a case where the lake had fallen down, and they went out and found and cast all those tracks. But that case still hasn't even been cleared up yet either, because the last I had heard, Cliff was actually leaning towards that being a hoax, and they're pretty sure they actually know who perpetrated the learning experience, as the hoaxer supposedly called it. So I need to nail him down on that.
Well, we did something out on this property that I think you're going to appreciate. One day, me and Shane wanted to go to an area that he calls Crawler Hill, because one time he was hiking up there and he had his GoPro pointed behind him, watching the ridge as he was walking. And you see this thing coming up, popping its head up, and following him and popping its head up as he's walking. So he calls that Crawler Hill. So we spent, a couple of hours cutting a trail to get my Polaris Ranger up there. And we took all of our camping supplies and we camped just below that ridge, set up the tent and had everything set up. And that night we were hit with rocks all night long. I mean, rocks were pelting us all night long. And we're laying in the tent listening to the rocks, and we're like, it's coming from up there. It's got to be coming from up there, because it's the only thing that makes sense, that they're raining down on us. So the next day, Shane gets up and goes up there, and he is a hell of a tracker. I mean, he can find impressions. And when he found where 2 came in over the top of that ridge, and it was the 2 juveniles. So the print sizes says it was the 2 juveniles. So we filmed Shane gathering up about 30 or 40 rocks, and we took a Sharpie pen and we put marks on the rocks. We went up there where all these footprints were found in the wood line just above us on that ridge, and placed these rocks marked side down where the prints were found. The second night we were pelted with rocks again, got up the next day and found the rocks that we had marked.
So something or someone stood on that hill and threw rocks at you. Now, I know that in my groups, especially, it doesn't, I mean, even if we're just out, even if it's just the yearly camp out, you don't want to fool around with us, because we're normally armed. I mean, and people understand that you go into a place where nobody lives and there's guys out there camping, it's probably not a good idea to stand on a ridge and throw rocks at them. If it was somebody that wanted you out of there, they would have raided your camp with automatic weapons and told you to get your shit moving. They're not going to, try and scare you by pelting rocks from the ridge line up there. So, what has opposable thumbs that can grip rocks and toss them that live in the area?
A lot of times rock throwing is such a a unanimous thing. It's almost with every encounter involves rock throwing. So, but a lot of times when you talk about rock throwing to people, their first thought is, how do you know it wasn't acorns falling out of a tree? How do you know it wasn't
because
this? How do you know
acorns
it wasn't
don't. Yeah.
So I think since we filmed this whole process and we're able to find the rocks that we had marked and placed up there by the footprints, so it was thrown on the second night, I think that is a way to peel back the layers of the onions and show people that indeed these things are throwing rocks, and you can't throw a rock without a thumb.
You know, one of the very first stories I ever heard about Sasquatch came from my grandfather, who was a moonshiner, and at his still, something just kept pacing around his camp. This kept pacing around. Second night, one of his old thump kegs. I don't know if you know what a thump keg is, but basically it's a big wooden keg that they use to cool off the moonshine as it comes up hot out of the distillery before it goes down through one of the kegs or through one of the coils. Well, when they get real thick and heavy, they change them out. So they just rolled this thing out into the woods. And he said in the middle of the night, it literally flew into his camp. Something picked it up and threw an old thump keg into his camp. Wow. They throw lots of things besides just rocks. They throw sticks. They throw boulders. I mean, literally, we've been out in canoes on native reservations and just heard giant cannonball-sized rocks. You ride over there and there's nobody over there. Even if it had been a little Indian bastard, he'd have been laughing.
Right.
You know, but no, I mean, they do. They most definitely, but marking them is so smart, because now you've got proof that at least that you marked them and that you put them up there.
Right.
You know, the whole, like, I can't stand the whole reality show videoing of a documentary like that, to where you have, 15 friggin' people, taking video of 4 dudes in the woods. Now you've got 23 people out in the woods and nothing's going to happen. So, the whole Finding Bigfoot, take to it. But you almost have to do that so that it's documented where you were when those things were returned. So that, because that was all like the thermal footage that a lot of people take. Did you document where everybody was before the thermal guy showed up?
Yes. Well, see, we were leaving camp. The same thing when Dan Nedrello was with us. We were actually walked out of camp and we go across this field. I'm going to say it's probably a 15 to 20 acre high grass field with occasional sporadic trees throughout the field. And that's how you get down to the lakes. It's through this field. And that's where we're catching them a lot with my thermal camera, because I've got my thermal camera on top of a stick and I can look out over this field as we're walking through it. And that's how I'll catch their heads poking up and looking at us or looking for us and things like that. So when we were leaving camp, I was actually in the back of the Polaris Ranger and Shane was driving and someone else was in the front seat with him. And I just told him I was going to whistle if I see anything in this field so that I'll need to stop. So we were going through this field, and in the original clip, the whole thermal video, you can see the campfire at the camp as we're pulling away from it, because I'm looking at the camp, and then I pan out to the right and I see a heat signature. And so I whistled and they stopped and I hopped out and I'm looking and it's facing us on the ground like this. And you can see a white heat of a round head and you can see big shoulders, and it's just laying in the field looking at me. And then you can see it undulating as it's belly crawling to its right and reaching out with its arm and kind of pulling itself along the ground to get to deeper cover. I think it's a fascinating video. But it's the places that we keep catching them over and over and over again. That's where we walked up within 8 foot of that juvenile with Dan with us. So for some reason, that's the area that they'll come into our campsite or leave our campsite. And that's where we're catching them.
Let's see if I can bring that video up here and see if we can share it that way. And screen share window there. Okay, sure. It's gonna let us do it. So this is part of that commando crawling video that you were talking about.
Yes, and I was actually filming this off of a laptop with my phone, so you can see the striations on the screen. It's not very good, but you can see it. It round white hot head with the shoulders on each side of the head. Once it gets past this tree, as it's undulating on the ground, moving towards its right, trying to stay hidden.
I mean, if that was a person down there attempting to do that, it'd be real difficult in that much darkness,
Right.
without cutting yourself all to shit, screaming out because something bit you.
Right.
You'd kind of have to be used to moving like that. Now, one of the during one of the investigations we had at Camp B in the Sierras, Rosie Hebe, that used to be part of the whole Team Taser, was out there. We had a FLIR with no recording device on it, and literally he saw a juvenile doing this exact same maneuver, like 45 yards outside of camp.
Well, I'd like to explain to some of the listeners that are listening and that will be listening to this in the future. And you say to yourself, when you look at that, how do you know that's not another animal? Well, I can tell you, other animals are so easy to identify on thermal. Deers just walk around like it's nobody's business.
Bear,
I've
yeah.
thermaled a mountain lion. I've thermaled wild hogs. I've thermaled every animal that creeps and crawls, and they are easy to identify because they're not trying to hide. These creatures, on the other hand, are absolutely constantly trying to observe us while trying to hide.
That's pretty nuts. Of course, the only things, a naysayer can say about that is what I would say now. And that would simply be that, there isn't enough detail. There isn't enough,
Right.
there isn't enough data there to really be analyzed at this point. But it's interesting to go along with the footprints, to go along with, the findings. Like it makes perfect sense that they would eat freshwater clams, because it would be one of the cleanest foods that they would have access to when they were available. They're not available all the time. What do they call them up there around Vancouver? I think they call them cockle eaters, because they'll be seen out there along the during low tide, and they're out there digging up the cockles certain times a year and eating them. Now, does that mean that the rest of their food sources are low and that's why they're out there doing it, or what the case may be? Like we were in, I guess it was Southern Washington, on the Indian reservation there at the Brown's house, Jonathan Brown's
Right,
compound.
I've seen that one. Good.
And we stayed out there for 3 nights before I became deathly ill, thanks to gas station clam chowder. Thank you, Jonathan. We had them. We had them within range of us. There, we had a giant hoot from out in the cow field that was 100 yards from where we were sleeping. There were a couple of howls that we caught. I think the second night that we were out there, Kirk Brandenburg was with us. He caught a couple of nice howls that were out there. But it was getting to be salmon season, and we know that they come close down into the rivers, especially like you said. They know what's safe and what isn't safe. And I'm sure the ones that are on the native reservation are probably a little less sketchy than the ones that are around, modern civilizations, so to speak.
Well, I can tell you, I've caught 3 separate videos, thermal videos, that shows the same behaviors in different locations, and it's actually allowed us to get a daytime video of one trying to hide behind some brush and a tree on the other side of a ravine, because I first caught it with my thermal. And here's what it is, and I'll explain it to you. When I'm looking through my thermal, I will look for like round white heat, possibly a head. And when I find something, I will stop and I'll look at it and I'll watch it. And I'll watch it for a long time, because I've caught 3 separate times. And here's what if you're looking straight at them, they'll freeze and they'll be frozen. But let's say this is some brush or a tree that they're wanting to move behind. They will move like this, very slowly. And it took 2 or 3 full minutes for the white heat signature to disappear because they were moving like that. Very slowly, almost to where you can't see them move at all, but they are moving. That is incredibly intelligent behavior.
To be able to even see and focus at that distance, though we do have the report of the large ocular cavities that, you know, that their eye openings would be big, which their eyes themselves would have larger irises, which would allow more light to come in, especially at night, which would be why they would be, I don't necessarily know that they're, you know, midnight and dark hour walkers, but they're definitely late twilight. I've encountered more activity during early dawn and late twilight than just about any other time during the day, unless you really piss them off or the cows move in. Like one of the areas that we investigate, they run cows up on the mountain at 7,000 feet, and pretty much if the cows are near you, then the Sasquatch are not. So you can go elsewhere.
But we've caught quick behavior, quick movement when our backs are to them, and our thermal camera is recording with our backs to them. That's when you'll get quick movement. But when you're facing them, you get the slow movement. That's incredible to me, and it shows a pattern that they do it over and over again. And that if they did that during the day, you'd never see them because they're moving extremely slow.
You know, and that's always been one of my things, that the human eye is trained to track moving things. And a lot of people, like I've done it myself hunting, you know, you spook a deer and it jumps a couple of times into the high grass and then stops dead. It might take me 2 or 3 minutes to find it in that high grass again, because visually it's just not moving anymore. So, you know, I'm having a difficult time tracking it. And I would expect that that Bigfoot would be the same exact way. If they can acknowledge that you're there and they can think that you're looking at them, then that, you know, would make sense for them to go into an, you know, ultra freeze kind of thing. People say, let's go for a walk in the woods. And I say, no, let's go for a sit in the woods. Let's take your camp chair and go walk a mile into the woods and just open it up by a meadow and just sit at the edge of the meadow and see what comes through the meadow. The same thing I tell people with game cams all the time. Stop putting them on a game trail. That's dumb. Set them up to take a picture every 20 seconds during the day, clear up till twilight, and have it overlook a meadow as far as it can see. These are 12 megapixel cameras these days. For God's sakes, right. You can see clean across that meadow and into the tree line on the other side. See what's coming and going first. You don't put up a camera and hope you get pictures. You find tracks of something that you're interested in seeing what's leaving the tracks, and then you put up a camera. Right. You know what? Did you guys have any cameras deployed in that area there? Any game cams?
We've tried it a couple of times with not a whole lot of luck. Not like we do with the thermal. The thermal, we can catch them in action as they are stalking us, as they are following us, as they are popping their heads up trying to watch us. That's the things we've gotten lucky with the most. Game cameras, on the other hand, same issues with almost everyone trying to use game cameras. They avoid them. They, you know, we don't know. I don't think it's the infrared, or I don't think it's the electronics. I think that they are noticing them because we're getting a lot of pops. We're in our recorders. We're getting a lot of clicks and pops, which I think they're using an echolocation type thing. They can spot those things at such a distance because they're using clicks and pops, and they're listening for the reverberation coming back. And they notice right off the bat if it's something to avoid, if it's a plastic thing on the side of a tree, they get it.
I honestly think it's the smell. Plastic stinks like people to high heaven. And I don't care how much deer urine you squirt all over that's still going to smell like plastic and deer urine. So you're never going to get rid of that humanized smell that goes along with a game camera. A friend of mine his mother was having a problem up on the mountain. She honestly thought that she had a Sasquatch that was kind of stalking her animals around the property and everything. I said, well, do yourself a favor. Put up a couple of game cams wherever you think that the Bigfoot are coming into, and they'll most likely do one of two things. One, you'll get them on game camera, and then I can get a bunch of people involved and we can probably get your issue solved. Or two, they'll see that it's a game cam and they'll beat the hell out of there, and then problem solved either way. Right. And they put up the game cams, and he says, I swear to God, man, by the next weekend, it took 3 days. We put them up on Wednesday. By Sunday, there was no more activity back there by the house. There was activity on other parts of the property. They heard it fighting with a mountain lion one night, but it didn't come back to the cabin. I was like, and I swear it's the smell of it. It's that when you go to an investigation location with 4 cars and you set up camp and there's now 5 tents out there and a hammock and a campfire and all this plastic coolers and all this artificial food and all of this stuff, you were just announcing to the woods that humans are here. Just for a solid day, you reek across the forest of human.
And clearly they are watchers. Clearly they are curious watchers. And so it is hard to trick them with a camera when they're already watching you.
That is very true. And, the thermal is what we've had most luck with up in the Sierras. Some audio, a lot of personal experiences. And that's always unfortunate because I'm a real early riser. Like I like to get up at first light, kick the fire up a little bit and kind of see what's moving in the woods that early in the morning. And I've actually heard more of the wailing calls in the morning than I've ever heard at night. At night, most of the time it's a hoot or a whoop or a clap, something that's just kind of enough sound to get somebody's attention, but not like disclose their location. And that situational awareness is what, is I think with you that I'm agreeing with you there.
Yeah.
Well, let's play. Matter of fact, you've got a clip here called Hoots.
Well, let me give a build up to that.
Right.
Those hoots happened the night of my first encounter at the Chickasaw Park. When I saw the 2 that came out, those hoots, there was like 17 hoots in a 3-minute span. And those are just, that clip was just 4 or 5 of those hoots that happened. And then there was no hoots, but then they came out of the woods. That's why I believe it was them doing those hoots.
Well, let's give this sucker a listen. Now, I don't know if you realize it or what, but I've got analytical ears here listening to this because I've never listened to these before. I just downloaded them right before the show. There's actually an answer call to those hoots. So the loud hoot that you hear in the front, there is actually a secondary odd hoot reply in the background, and it goes from high to low. So you get hoot, and then you get a hoot.
But I can tell you, at the time, there was like 13 to 17 of them.
No. I was an owl biologist, by the way. That's not an owl. I can't recognize that owl call from anything. That's not a screech owl. It's not a barred owl. It's not a great horned owl. All of those owls are available in your area that you're talking about there. But I like I said, I mean, that's what my first degree was in biology, and I studied owls, and the great horned owl was exactly what I studied. That whatever that hoot was way too big of a creature to be an owl.
Right. And from my experience of sitting in my truck and listening to that, it happened that many times in that short of a span, and then it was no more. And then they came out of the wood line. I never heard it again. I never heard it afterwards. And then I went through this whole encounter of them moving around and positioning themselves behind my truck and checking out my campsite. but there was no more hoots. It happened all before they came out of the woods.
I sat in Middle Tennessee outside of a small town called Manchester at a place called Devil's Backbone. And literally it is a devil's backbone to get down to this lake. I mean, you're on three wheels a lot getting down in there. I had a long hooting conversation with something across the lake on the other shore that finally walked down to the shoreline to see what was calling at him. And then he turned around and walked away when he saw it was me.
Now I do know that there are a lot of people that are misinterpreting an actual owl call, and they'll be like, "Oh, but it sounded like an 800-pound owl." And so there's a lot of people that really are hearing owls at times and are misinterpreting them because of what they want it to be.
Right.
In my particular encounter, I'm just presenting that this happened right before they stepped out of the wood line, and then I actually saw them. So could that have been them? It very well could have been.
I mean, it could have been a correspondence. I mean,
but it happened in a way that it involved a sighting.
Right. I mean, there was mitigating circumstances that went along with it that lead to a conclusion. It's
exactly.
you didn't come to a preconceived conclusion. You came to that conclusion after the event.
Exactly.
You know, people just hear something in the woods. They hear owls and they never see or hear anything else. They go, "Oh, it must have been Bigfoot."
Right.
There is a I don't know how to explain it, because I have birds and I listen to them all the time. I mean, I've got a giant raptor over my shoulder over here. You know, I mean, I listen to the sounds that they make constantly. Well, there's a couple of them squeaking right now. My little babies I got over there, I'm raising, and you know that hoot, whatever that was. I don't know that it was. I don't know that it was a male, a fully mature male making that sound, but it was definitely something with bigger lungs than an owl had. That's just my opinion of it. Anyhow,
well, I would concur, only because of how it ended up.
Yeah,
two Bigfoots that stepped out of the wood after that.
I had, like I said, I had that similar event happen in Tennessee, where it got sick and tired of hooting back and forth at me and walked down to the water line to see who the heck it was. And when it wasn't one of his own, he freaked out, turned around and walked back up the hill.
Well, what I think I determined after the fact is that they were trying to elicit some movement within the tent. I think they were just blasting that hoot to see if they could get something to wake up in the tent, because when they moved in behind my truck and positioned the truck between them and the tent was the main focus of what they were worried about. That's where somebody should have come out if there was somebody in that campsite. So all of that culminated in them, curiously checking things out, but making sure that the coast was clear beforehand.
I asked myself that I want to ask you, why didn't you open the door and step out on them? But I know why.
You couldn't have paid me $1 million to open that door.
Everybody wants to mess with a Bigfoot till a Bigfoot shows up.
Right.
We had a guy up on the mountain with us on one trip. We were supposed to be there for 7 days. He made it to day 2.5. Okay, he was so terrified that a Bigfoot was actually going to show up there, because we had some activity that was leading us, they were around. They wasn't directly in our camp, but we found some tracks, we found some evidence, we found there were some calls at night. Dude was really freaked out, and we had to take him down to Bassett Station and leave him. It was like, we're not going home for another 5 days, bro. So
at the apex of my encounter, it actually had its hands on my ladder racks on the side beam and the cross beam. It had its hands like that as it was standing there at the back corner of my truck. And I was in such a panic that I thought, since it was touching my truck, that it could feel my heartbeat, because it was pounding. My heartbeat was pounding, and I actually pulled my back off the seat of my truck, because I was like, he can feel it. He can feel my heartbeat. And I did not want him to know I was in my truck.
Well, it was. I used to stay in a cab over, in the back of a pickup truck cab over. There's the big like a Lear camper. And the windows in those things are just they're just little pieces of plastic that slide, and a little piece of screen. And I used to sleep on that dinette pullout. It was just like, oh man, I'm just gonna wait for Biggie to just like reach his arm in there and grab me and try to yank me through that little hole, because he could. He's gonna come in there and say, oh look, it's like a can of tuna. Come here, little man.
Clearly their behavior that night, if it's indicative of their behavior everywhere, they are very cognizant of us and are very worried about us stepping out on them. So if that's their behavior everywhere, they are worried about what
which explains why they're so elusive, which would explain why nobody really gets a real good look at them. Now I got to ask you, because some of my fans are of the same feeling of me. Once upon a time, I would have never killed one of these things. But in modern times, if we really want to get anywhere with it, we're going to have to harvest an animal.
Yeah, but I just don't see how. I don't see, they don't seem to, you can't put a bead on them. They just are not still long enough for you to put a bead on them. So I just don't know how that's going to happen unless it's a hunter that happens to catch one at the right time, at the right place. That's not aware of them.
I mean, yeah.
Not aware of them with a bead on.
Well, in Justin's situation, it was a large adult trying to get his attention away from the two juveniles that were on the other side of the meadow, which allowed him to bear down on it, sight it in, and shoot it. But even when he did shoot it, it turned, which allowed it to just go through the cavity instead of going through the organ pumpkin, and it didn't die. So, that tells you there. And that was with a pretty hefty, I want to say it was with a 270. That was pretty hefty round going through there. Now he doesn't shoot anything less than a 300 Win Mag, because if we're going to shoot it,
it's going to have to be the right size, and placement is going to have to be specific. So I don't know if all those things.
I don't want to capture one because, I mean, like we talked about, who would really have the facilities to take care of something like that?
Right.
I mean, you couldn't. I mean, what does it eat? What does it drink?
So, I mean, good luck.
There's so many. The government's got these things in a zoo somewhere and they're studying them. The government doesn't want to know about Bigfoot, because if they know about Bigfoot, then they have to do something about it. And logging is like the number 2 resource of America. The logging contracts that they sell in the national parks and the national forests is the second way that this country makes money. So they don't want to shut any of that down. So why would they go out of their way to capture Bigfoot to study them? They just want to ignore the problem as long as they can. They hope some spotted salamander don't pop up in friggin' Oregon this year.
Well, I think the government is aware of them. I think it's to the point where they know their behaviors and they know their demeanor, which is to really steer clear of us. So I think the government's aware of them, but I don't think that it's a need that they have to acknowledge them, because they know that these things will steer clear of us anyways.
The J.C. Johnson, God rest him. He was a rad dude. Let's put it that way. But there are a lot of people out there, because he was in that whole Melba Ketchum debacle with the DNA of the hybrid Bigfoot human woman weird monkey man thing. She didn't. I mean, for a DNA scientist, she doesn't even understand how hybridization works. It was the strangest thing. But he used to feel that there was a government plan as to to cover up Bigfoot that goes all the way down to your local sheriff. Like even your local sheriff knew what to do if a Bigfoot got hit on one of their highways, and they would know who to call. And I was like, yeah, but what if your sheriff is Forrest Gump? Because in the town that I lived in, in Coffee County, Tennessee, our sheriff was 81 years old and been the sheriff for 50 years. I mean, he was a lunatic. He wouldn't have had no friggin' plan to cover up.
Yeah, that seems a little complex for me.
Yeah, but I mean, because that's where some of the conspiracy people want to go with it, is that, the government knows all about it and they're just trying to hide it from everybody. It's like, well, if that's the case, then people like me who've been doing this for 10 years wouldn't still be doing this.
Yeah.
I'd have had visits from little men in black, going, pal, you might want to shut up about the Bigfoot stuff.
Yeah, that's just too deep for me.
It wouldn't have been pulp culture with, Animal Planet funding, 100 people in the woods every week.
Yeah.
That's the other bad thing, is funding. I mean, that's the other struggle it becomes. If we harvest an animal, we can get funding to study the rest. So harvesting one animal really will lead to the benefit of all.
And I'm surprised that one just hasn't come in and it smashed into the radiator of a diesel truck.
There's stories of them being hit by the trucks and getting up and walking away. I mean, these are some seriously stout animals. And from the one that I saw full bodied, yeah, I mean, he was a linebacker for the Green Bay Packers, man. I mean, he was built like a machine.
But if one doesn't come all wrapped up into the cow catcher of a train or something like that, or
get blown up by some old explosives from a gold mine or something, I mean, it's gonna be tough.
Hard to get.
You remember the old original 6 files from the MABRC from the early days where they had all those protocols for how to catch a Bigfoot? And some of their ideas weren't horrible, using cargo strapping and stuff, stuff that's 3,000 and 4,000 pound tensile strength is what you're going to need if you're going to try and capture a Bigfoot. Do you remember the TV show that the Discovery Channel put on that Meldrum was involved with Bigfoot Captured? It was like half fantasy and half kind of Bigfooty documentary. It was in a whole bunch of night vision camera, and they had them in this great big cage in the middle of the woods. It was absolutely insane. It was just like, well, how are you going to get that thing out of there? Helicopter? Okay, so the whole world's not going to see Bigfoot coming out of the woods in a cage being flown by a helicopter. It just, how would you get it out?
Yeah, I don't know about any of that.
All right. Well, there's our hour, buddy, and it went by fast, and we didn't even get to like half of the audio. So we'll have you back again in the new year. How does that sound?
Hey, I like it.
All right. I appreciate you coming on with us, man. Let's give a shout out here to some of the people that are hanging with us tonight. It's the night before Thanksgiving, so we're a little light in the fan department tonight. But there's Jim Anderson. Hello, Jim. Glad you're with us tonight. There's Aaron and Mary Duncan. They are the hardcore people. Ken the Viking. Hey, buddy. Glad you're there. Well, there's Randy Harrington. He was checking in ahead of time. Shane Barber. Hey, look, it's Tommy from Boston. There's some fella named Ken. Oh, I always get that all over my microphone. He's got to get a new name. He literally just like typed in a bunch of letters when he made a friggin' username, and he's had it for years now. Years. It's crazy. Let's see here. The Brown Dwarf's in the house. What's up, Brown Dwarf? Glenn. Yeah, that dude's got friggin' dreadlocks like down to his ankles. Real ones. Rod Dupree, he's always in the place to be. He made it out to our camp out last year to hang out for a while. It was pretty slick. We were up in outside of Reading in the middle of like 3 fires. There was one valley that wasn't on fire, so that's where we had to camp out last year.
And nobody even got to hear the temper tantrum.
Oh, well, we can still play it. We haven't gone off the air yet.
It's too long. It's too long. We'll just do it another time.
We'll save that one for next time. Yeah, because I want to. We'll start out with your. Yeah, we'll get there. It's just, man, I got to talking, you got to talking, and that's how it goes sometimes, man. Titan Glass 88.
What can you do?
We have you back. That's what we do. Mark Roberts, hello there. Glad you're with us. Collier Wilmus is checking in. Hello there. Kevin K, 208 is in the house. Dixie Q. I'm pretty sure I said hi to Shane, but there's Mr. Fang, 3. We should probably have you come back on with Shane, and we can really dip into it a little bit.
He's got a lot of information. I would just be in his way.
Well, then we'll do it on separate nights. That's no problem. David Lee's in the house with us as well. And that's okay. Well, there we go. I think we have made it through everybody tonight. We are good. Yeah, tomorrow is Thanksgiving. The heathen in me says, go back to Europe. The whitey in me says, happy Thanksgiving. It's always a constant battle in my world, man. It really, really is. Both of my grandmothers were Native American, and they hated Thanksgiving, but they always came to our house for Thanksgiving, even though they hated it. Why? The food.
Food's good.
That's right. It's all about the food. Besides, they don't get to yell at you but a few times a year. So Thanksgiving was the day it happened. All right. With that, everybody, we want to thank you tonight. Thanks, Randy, for being here. Seriously, we got into a lot of it, but we'll get into a lot more next time as well.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I
appreciate-
always like talking shop.
Exactly. So come back and see us next time. And for Randy Harrington, I'm the Reverend Jeff Kelly, and we'll see you maybe next week. What is next week? Next week is, we'll have a Bigfoot Entertainment Monthly coming your way next week with a lot of neat surprises. I found an old hard drive that has video and audio files. Good Lord help us all. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Randy.
All right.